Hello and welcome to our public lecture, The Concept and Experience of Holy Wisdom in Hagia Sophia. My name is Anna Stavrakopoulou and I'm the Program Director in Byzantine Studies at Dumbarton Oaks. Before introducing our speaker, Professor Bissera Pentcheva, I would like to invite Tom Cummins for some introductory remarks. Let me present him first. Thomas B.F. Cummins is the Dumbarton Oaks Professor of the History of Pre-Columbian and Colonial Art in the Department of the History of Art and Architecture at Harvard University and Director of Dumbarton Oaks. His research and teaching focuses on pre-Columbian and Latin American colonial art. He recently co-edited Sacred Matters, Animism and Authority in the Pre-Columbian Americas with Steve Koisiba and John Janusek, published by Dumbarton Oaks in 2020. Tom.
Thank you, Anna. And it's a pleasure to be with you all here today, and good day to you all, whatever time of day it is, or even whatever day it is for you. It's a pleasure to be able to bring this to a larger audience in a time of dislocation and isolation. The only thing that has been really positive is to expand our public so that we can offer around the world some of the scholarship that makes up our Dumbarton Oaks. And it's really a true pleasure to be able to bring this to you with the idea that next year we will be able to be on campus. We can all look forward to having some of this put behind us and to return to some sense of normality. But with that, it's important to say that these days we've been able to provide a forum for this work and for people's work to not only go on, but to be disseminated to as large a public as we possibly can achieve. And so it's really a wonderful thing to be able to have Bissera come and to present her work for us, sitting as she is in her own office at Stanford. I'm here at Dumbarton Oaks, and Anna is in Athens. We're separated by hours and miles, but we're all brought together in the fellowship of scholarship. And that's what's most important. And I appreciate her coming to present to you. I appreciate you all being with us. And I also deeply appreciate the staff at Dumbarton Oaks who make this all possible. They have worked tirelessly in a period of great difficulty to make sure that what Dumbarton Oaks stands for at the highest level of scholarship continues. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. So Bissera Pentcheva, I'm truly delighted to introduce Bissera. Pentcheva is an art historian of Byzantine and medieval art. Her publications include 3 books with Pennsylvania State University Press, Icons and Power, the Mother of God in Byzantium. It was published in 2006, and in 2010, it won the John Nicholas Brown Prize. The Sensual Icon, Space, Ritual, and the Senses in Byzantium, published in 2010, and Hagia Sophia, Sound, Space, and Spirit in Byzantium, published in 2017, and got the 2018 American Academy of Religion Award for Excellence in Historical Studies. She has also published 2 edited volumes, Aural Architecture in Byzantium, AURAL, Aural Architecture, Music, Acoustics, and Ritual, Ashgate 2018, and Icons of Sound, Voice, Architecture, and Imagination in Medieval Art, Routledge 2021, just came out. Her work is informed by anthropology, music, and phenomenology, focusing on the changing appearance of objects and architectural spaces. For the past decade, she has co-directed the interdisciplinary project Icons of Sound that explores the acoustics and aesthetics of Hagia Sophia. Bissera, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Tom, for this invitation. I'm very happy to present at Dumbarton Oaks and for a large audience. And I also thank all the staff, Judy and Charlotte at Dumbarton Oaks, for their help in the scheduling of this event. So I'll turn to the talk today. I'll share my screen. Hagia Sophia is a polyvalent symbol of power, and it is a question and a choice of how it is used, to repress and silence, or to open and include. We all stand to benefit from equitable society. The hoarding of resources, the fractionalization of sacred space only bring division and renounce the possibility of a common goal and a societal investment in harmonious cohabitation. As a scholar, I would like to propose an approach to Hagia Sophia that can enable us to envision such a pluralistic, tolerant, equitable society. My focus is on aesthetics, for sensorial experience is the threshold to the spiritual. It appeals to our physical senses before it triggers language, interpretation, cultural codification, and difference. I bring together Christian with Islamic mystical texts to uncover shared spirituality, which in turn could open the possibility of recognizing otherness, strangeness in one's identity. What I argue is that the strand of shared Neoplatonic spirituality defines mystical movements in both Christianity and Islam. Neoplatonism is the foreignness within identity, but it's also in a strange way a bridge between Christianity and Islam. As a result, reading texts sourced from Byzantine mystagogy, the Islamic Brethren of Purity, and Sufism against the material fabric of Hagia Sophia leads us to insights into the operations of sacred space and enables us to see how this space seamlessly translates the two religious idioms. The living waters of the sea, the rays of light, breeze, optical reflection, and acoustic reverberation are phenomena, metaphors, and materiality within Hagia Sophia that make present the metaphysical in the sensorial. On the Christian side, I draw on the 6th century writings of Pseudo Dionysius, who translated Neoplatonic thought into mainstream Christian spirituality, the 7th century mystagogy of Maximus the Confessor, and the 2 6th century ekphrasis of Hagia Sophia by Procopius and Paul the Silentiary. On the Islamic side, my analysis is ahistorical. I have sourced my quotes from the 10th century Risala letter on music, letter 50, of the Brethren of Purity, an esoteric fraternity of Muslim urbanites invested in Neoplatonism, and the 13th century Sufi poetry of Jalaluddin Rumi, whose writings established the Mevlevi Sufi order, to whom the Ottoman sultans had a particular inclination. Rumi's poetry also exercised a profound influence on Ottoman literature. He enabled the articulation of an Ottoman spiritual understanding of sacred space built outside the discourse of conquest and suppression. I read Rumi into the interior of Hagia Sophia, knowing that he did not write about this space. Yet I show through this ahistorical juxtaposition how alterity can dwell in the center of one's identity. That is, Islamic mystical texts channel ideas that are at the heart of Christian understanding of transcendence, like the circular motility, choros, or the emptying of the self in the divine, henosis. I set this diachronic approach as a modern mirror, allowing us to recognize the extimate in the intimate, the foreign in the familiar, and thus suggest what Hagia Sophia can mean spiritually in Islamic eyes beyond the reductivist neo-Ottoman triumphalist rhetoric of today. And I am inspired to follow this path by the words of the philosopher and psychoanalyst Yulia Kristeva, and she writes, I quote, "Strangely, the stranger lives within us. He is the hidden face of our identity, the space that wrecks our abode, the time in which understanding and affinity founder. By recognizing him within ourselves, we are spared detesting him in himself, a symptom that precisely turns we into a problem, perhaps makes it impossible. The foreigner comes in when the consciousness of my difference arises, and he disappears when we acknowledge ourselves as foreigners, unamenable to bonds and communities. End of quote. I am advocating for this consciousness that we are all foreigners, and alterity is at the core of our intimacy. And what better way to preserve Hagia Sophia's outstanding universal value than by recognizing its polyvalence, its strangeness, and its protean matter and intangible spirituality resonating with and anchoring different religions. The void under the dome is known in Greek as kallichoros. Choros defines both space and action, circular stage and the singing and dance. The 6th century ekphrasis recognized the circular shape of this architectural void in Hagia Sophia and read into it a circular motility as the outward expression of an invisible divine force, and I quote from Procopius. And whenever anyone enters this church to pray, he understands at once that it is not by any human power or skill, but by the influence of God that this work has been so finely turned. And so his mind is lifted up towards God and exalted, feeling that he cannot be far away, but must especially love to dwell in this place which he has chosen. End of quote. The potter's wheel brings about the image of ceaseless, circling motion, the choros. The kallichoros is formed by this whirling dynamic, and once swept by the choros, the faithful entering the interior feel the upward pull while simultaneously perceiving divinity's earthbound descent. God has descended. He loves to dwell in the kallichoros, to hang out, to linger, as summarized in the Greek term amphilochorein. The second ekphrasis, written in Homeric hexameter by Paul the Silentiary, makes similar observations. It recognizes the circular motility, causing the interior to spin like a helmet, enabling its gradual ascent to heaven. And I quote, "A helmet, rising above into the boundless air, spins elicite it from both sides into a sphere. Radiant as the heavens, it bestrides the roof of the church." End of quote. The interior of Hagia Sophia, the boundless kallichoros, appears like a helicopter pulled by circular motion of its propeller to ascend heavenward. Both Procopius and Paul the Silentiary channel a Neoplatonic understanding of the animating circular dynamic of the cosmos. Pseudo-Dionysius defines it as follows, and I quote, "This, so far as I know, is the first rank of heavenly beings, positioned in a circle around God in immediate proximity to him. Simply and ceaselessly, this circle dances around an eternal knowledge of him according to the angel's highest rank, as the celestial nature is ever moving. The divine intelligences are said to move as follows. Firstly, they move in a circle, while they are at one with those illuminations which without beginning and without end emerge from the good and the beautiful. Then they move in a straight line. Out of providence, they come to offer unerring guidance to all those below them. Finally, they move in a spiral, for even while they are providing for those beneath them, they continue to remain what they are, and they turn unceasingly around the beautiful and the good from which all identity comes. The soul, too, has similar movements." End of quote. The divine intelligences simultaneously perform a tripartite dynamic, a circular, linear up and down, and finally a helicoidal one. This celestial motility is mirrored by the mortal soul. Natural light also performs a continual diurnal choros, a circular dance, and this phenomenon visualizes the circular motility of the divine in Hagia Sophia. The positioning of the windows in the drum of the dome, in the apex of the tympana, in the apsis, enables the viewer to perceive its rotation in the course of the day and the year. Thomas Whittemore, who directed the restoration of the mosaics and helped the establishment of the museum in 1934, was mesmerized by the sun's choros. He observed, I quote, "Direct light rushes in, shining streams, dazzles, keeps constantly moving and revolving. Hagia Sophia is a liturgical instrument, tuned by light." End of quote. The main axis of the building is approximately 32 degrees southeast, and it aligns with the azimuth of the sun for Christmas on December 25th. So I'm showing you here a drawing by Inanichi, and in the red you have the movement of the sun during the winter solstice. In the blue you have the movement of the sun during the summer solstice. So you can see the direct alignment through the apse on the winter solstice. During the winter solstice, as the sun rises, the first rays pass through the center of the main east-west axis. The moment that you see here. And then eventually they touch the floor, move in the direction towards the apse, and then the southern side is illuminated, which illuminates the northern side of the building. And the light is extinguished at the northeast corner. Similarly, half a year later, as the summer solstice on June 21st appears, the last rays of the setting sun align with the east-west axis. Here, they'll align with the apse again. Sunrise starts at the northern tympanum, the northeast exedra, and the apse, and gradually it moves, reaching the floor, and sliding on it creates pools of water. These tracks of luminosity travel through the kallichoros, reach the ambo, and then they disappear. At noon that you just saw, the interior has no direct sunlight. It is mystical and dark. This time coincides with the third hour and the distribution of the Eucharist, presenting the divine in the mystical illumination of diffuse, indirect light. Direct sun rays return in the interior around 1:30 in the afternoon, and the shafts of light circle around the southern tympanum. These rays reach the floor and transform it upon contact into pools of water. At sunset, they reach the west facade, what you saw at the end of the animation, and as the sun sets down, its rays inversely climb to reach and illuminate the apse. Right at that second of completion, making the apse incandescent, the sun dies and natural light fades away. The circumambulation of light inscribes the metaphysical into the perceptual and temporal in Hagia Sophia. The circular dynamic of choros, pushing the soul to be uplifted to the divine, shapes the understanding of wisdom, Sophia, the abstract concept to which Hagia Sophia is dedicated. Wisdom in scripture is defined as a mirror, esoptron, and an icon, ikon. I quote, "No blemish creeps in her, for wisdom is the radiance of the ineffable light and a spotless mirror of the divine energies and its most sacred image." Pseudo Dionysius expands further on the divine mirror. He says, "A hierarchy bears in itself the mark of God. Hierarchy causes its members to be images of God in all respects, to be clear and spotless mirrors, reflecting the glow of primordial light, and indeed God himself. It ensures that when its members have received this full and divine splendor, they can then pass it on, this light generously and in accordance with God's will, to beings further down the scale." End of quote. The divine as esoptron, mirror, defines the apex, the dome at Hagia Sophia. It diffuses light that illuminates the lower orders. The material shell of Hagia Sophia enacts this divine illumination that causes matter to become a reflective, incandescent mirror. The windows in the drum of the dome and in the apsis and exedra channel direct light from above, transforming sun rays into columns of light, giving a paradoxical perceptual appearance of tangible matter. Dust and smoke of incense can make air dense and enhance this perceptual reification of light. When the sun rays penetrate the interior, they gradually descend to touch the floor, transforming its polished surface into pools of light and thereby causing a concatenated perceptual metamorphosis of stone and light into the isomorphism of water. This liquescence, or high reflectivity coefficient of Procunesian marble, which is on the floor of Hagia Sophia, endows the space with unusual when compared to modern aesthetics, in which the floor has higher reflectivity compared to the walls and ceiling. In a modern building, surface reflectance recommendations are as follows: 20% for the floor, 50% for the walls, and 80% for the ceiling. In Hagia Sophia, this ratio is in inverse. The highest reflectivity belongs to the floor. Hence, its current covering with carpet subdues the luminescence of the interior and undercuts the original aesthetic. Similarly, the insistent simultaneous use of LED lights disrupts the mystical and dramatic effects of the light pools on the marble floor and walls, destroying the opalescent shine of the marble, at times reminiscent of the surface of the Bosphorus and mother of pearl. What in other buildings would be considered blinding glare, in Hagia Sophia becomes an incarnation of spirit in matter, empsychosis. Hagia Sophia enacts the process of inspiriting by making the effects of light perceptually prominent, attracting the attention of the viewer. Paul the Silentiary recognizes the animating effect of natural light in the great church and how it quickens marble and stone, making them radiant, reflective mirrors, and I quote, "The ceiling encompassing gold inlaid tesserae, whose pouring down in glittering gold streaming ray irresistibly bounces off the faces of the faithful." End of quote. Hagia Sophia is a system. Once energy is introduced in it, light, it bounces off, intensifies, and in the process, it animates and agitates all matter contained inside the material shell, transforming substance hilly into perceptual radiant pools of water. The Byzantine formula for inspiriting is a cross in a circle, the very symbolon which once graced the apex of the Justinianic dome. It appears in the interior decor and on many liturgical furnishings and vessels, polycandela, and the Eucharist patens and chalices in Byzantium, and it is understood as a sign, channeling spirit and producing charis, grace. The cross in a circle is a chiasm. I'm showing you one of the places on the walls of Hagia Sophia, above in the spandrels of the second cornice, below the second cornice, where there were bronze crosses in the porphyry discs, and you can still see the shadows of this porphyry, of the cross, or this cross in a circle. Studies on chiasm have explored this formula in prose and poetry. Chiasm is present in Homer's Odyssey, in the Psalms, in John's Gospel, to name a few important texts. Chiasm is an inverted symmetry or horizontal mirror, and its simplest form is verse A and B mirrored across the horizontal axis C into B1 and A1. Psalm 8 will serve as my model right now. It has 4 verses that lead to a chiastic center, followed by the inverted symmetry of the closing 4 lines. Man is at the center of the created world, framed by the divine. Above are the skies, below the earth and waters, a world enveloped by God and praising his creation, which is reflected in the frame. Chiasm imprints spirit in matter. This is the reason the Eucharist bread carries its stamp. Chiasm is thus both a mirror and empsychosis, and thus an expression of Sophia, the radiant mirror. The chiastic shape is invested in the cross in a circle, but it also subconsciously manifests itself in the wave pattern of the book-matched Proconnesian marble. Like an incident and reflected ray, these mirror symmetries draw attention to the spiritual operation of the esotron and inspiriting. Chiasm's figuration of mirroring and inspiriting define the motility of the soul and its transcendence, emptying into a union with the divine, kenosis in henosis, emptying into a union. Remember the chiasm in Psalm 8, and the human at the center of it. The human being achieves likeness to God through a mirroring process independent from pictorial mimesis. The mind, nous, acts as such a mirror. If this esotron is set wrongly or dimmed, it will no longer be able to capture, reflect the divine. Likeness will be lost, and with it the possibility to sustain the image of God, the ikon to Theou. And I quote from Gregory of Nyssa. As we said, the mind is decorated by the likeness of the prototype's beauty in the way that a mirror is shaped from the reflection of the person who appears in it. By this analogy, the nature managed by the mind is set up in a similar way. It is adorned by the beauty at hand, like some mirror of a mirror. The nous reflects the divine, and it allows for the possibility to recuperate through reflection the state of being an ikon to Theou. Gregory of Nyssa defines the icon not as a representation, but as a performance, reflection of incident rays. The mind is attracted to the divine wisdom. Triggered by love, it progresses towards Sophia, wisdom, as Maximus the Confessor in the 7th century states, and I quote, "For from God come both our general power of motion and the particular way that we move toward Him. If an intellective being is moved intellectively, that is in a manner appropriate to itself, then it will necessarily become a knowing intellect. But if it knows, it surely loves that which it knows, and if it loves, it certainly suffers an ecstasy towards it as an object of love. If it suffers this ecstasy, it obviously urges itself onward, and if it urges itself onward, it surely intensifies and greatly accelerates its motion. And if its motion is intensified in this way, it will not cease until it is wholly present in the whole beloved and wholly encompassed by it, willingly receiving the whole saving circumscription by its own choice, so that it might be wholly qualified by the whole circumscriber, and being wholly circumscribed, will no longer be able to wish to be known from its own qualities, but rather from those of the circumscriber, in the same way that air is thoroughly permeated by light, or iron in a forge is completely penetrated by fire, or anything else of this sort." End quote. Maximus the Confessor explains how an intellective being driven by the force Sophia transcends the limits of the self, and it is suffused in the divine and thus reaches deification. The movement is circular, helical and ascending, in which the self transcends its limits and dissolves in the divine, and this process is circumscription, crossed in a circle. Christians and Muslims share this concept of performative iconicity, produced through reflection, henosis. In their Epistle 50, dedicated to music, the Neoplatonist Brethren of Purity, Ikhwan al-Safa, a mystical sect of Islam formed in the 10th century Basra, writes as follows, I quote, "When images of beautiful precepts are inscribed on individual souls, they become analogous to and correspond to the perfect soul, and are filled with longing for it and a desire to be conjoined with it. When they depart from the physical shell, these individual souls ascend to the heavenly realm and are united with the highest host, and thereupon they become sure of eternity and are safe from annihilation and experience the pleasure of existence in a state of purity. End of quote. The imprint of beauty on the individual soul makes it aspire to the perfect divine soul and seek to ascend and fuse with it, while the brethren see union in the souls leaving the body and ascending like a pearl freed from the shell, and they say, I quote, "Souls are extracted from bodies just as pearls from an oyster shell." End of quote. The opalescent marble of Hagia Sophia at sunrise and sunset articulates this notion of body as an oyster shell and soul as a pearl. But let me come back to the nous, to the mind, reflecting the divine light. If the brethren of purity see union as the soul leaving the body and ascending, the 13th century Sufi mystic Rumi envisions it as an internal operation, polishing one's heart to reflect the divine, and I quote, "I went to the mountains of Herat and Kandahar. I looked. He was not in that hill or dale. I gazed into my own heart. There I saw him. He was nowhere else." End of quote. The human being, as a microcosm, reflects the macrocosm. There, in the faithful's polished heart, the icon of the divine reifies. The metaphor of the mirror, which is expressive of Sophia and the nous striving for a union, is a phenomenon in Hagia Sophia. It is both a temporal enactment and a graphic chiastic sign. Linguistically, mirroring associates the onomatopoeic murmur of the sea, marmar, with the marble, marmarum. Light and breeze make the surface of the sea become alive, quicken in coruscation. So too, light as an intangible column of sunrays transforms the surface of marmarum into the marmarigma glitter, resembling pools of water. And both marble and glitter share affinity to margar, margarita, the pearl. Paul the Silentiary writes to this end, and I quote, "The peak of Proconnesus, soothingly spreading over the entire pavement, has gladly given its back to the life-giving mistress. The softly rippling Bosphorus appears as the radiance of dark metal that it has transformed into a luminous surface, like shining wool. The ekphrasis conjures the perceptual image of water that is in a continuous flux, its changing appearance shifting from molten metal to blinding whiteness of soft wool, speaks to the quickening life force. At sunset and sunrise, the Proconnesian marble takes on the opalescence of mother of pearl, evocative of the Bosphorus. The image of the Marmeirusa, murmuring sea, speaks also to an Islamic cosmology, for the divine creation starts in water. I quote, "We made every living thing of water. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ." But it is the poetry of Rumi which unfolds the spiritual significance of the sea with its lapping waves of henosis. I quote, "Mankind, like a seagull, is sprung from the water, the sea of soul, risen from the sea. Why should the bird make here his home? Nay, we are pearls in that sea, therein we all abide, else why does wave upon wave follow the sea of soul? This the time of union's attainment, this the time of eternity's beauty, this the time of favor and largesse, this the ocean of perfect purity. The billow of largesse had appeared, the thunder of the sea had arrived, the morn of blessedness had dawned. Morn, no, this the light of God." End of quote. Humanity is like a seagull, alight and bobbing on the surface of the sea. Wave upon wave capture the creation of souls. The souls are pearls. What are the souls form? Allowing fusion, and thus it becomes a metaphor of transcendence, of henosis with the divine. The light of dawn illuminates the sea, its coruscating waves, and figure the quickening energy of the divine. The interior of Hagia Sophia, covered in Proconnesian marble, enacts the opalescence of the sea, suggesting waves and the sheltering mother of pearl, birthing pearls, souls. Water is about transformation, the disencumbering of spirit from matter, yet matter makes this transcendence sensorially perceptual in the optical phenomena played on the marble in Hagia Sophia. Rumi's poetry reveals shared sensitivity that allows Christian and Muslim to see their spirituality reflected in that space, and I quote from Rumi. "The vessel of my being was completely hidden in the sea. The sea broke into waves, and again wisdom arose. So it cast abroad a voice, so it happened, and thus it befell. Foamed the sea, and every foam fleck something took figure, and something was bodied forth. Every foam fleck of body, which received the sign from the sea, melted straightway, and turned to spirit in this ocean." End of quote. The vessel of being dissolves to give rise to spirit. Wisdom as light, voice, wind, riffles the surface of the sea. Foam bodies forth form, which disintegrate as quickly as they shape, releasing the individual pearls to seek circumscription in the divine. Water has an acoustic dimension in Hagia Sophia. The polished marble and the great interior volume of Hagia Sophia of 250,000 cubic feet results in reverberant acoustics. So too the concept of Sophia is defined in aural terms as the one who hymns at the gates, utters her voice, opens her lips to speak, her throat practices the truth, the words of her mouth are in righteousness. Sophia is the breath of God's power and the effusion of the pure glory of the Pantocrator. End of quote. All these quotes are from the scripture. Doxa, glory, is expressed through radiance. The words shape a synesthetic understanding of brightness as optical and acoustic. Moreover, the optical phenomenon of shafts of sun rays penetrating the interior and descending to touch the floor acquires an aural manifestation in the acoustic metaphor, in the acoustic waterfall, in which high-frequency waves concentrate and reflect and produce a bright golden rain that rains down the kallichoros. So the high frequencies of sound gather in the dome, and then just like the light, rain down to the floor. As waves, both light and sound reflect off polished surfaces. The visual symmetries, marked with the graphic formula of the butterfly symmetries on the book-matched marbles, acquire an acoustic equivalent in voice and reverberation. The great interior volume and reflective surfaces of marble ensure the extremely long reverberation that you can see within the range of the human voice of up to 11 seconds. Endow the voice with special powers. Paul the Silentiary recognizes the role of the vast interior volume and polished marble for the acoustics when he writes, "Who will sing gapingly with the thundering mouths of Homer, the marble meadow solidly assembled along the walls, or the open plains of the haltingly high Naus?" End of quote. The thundering voice of the space is the residual sound that continues to propagate and reflect after the initial note is sung in the space. These are the 11 seconds. In the writings about the singing in Hagia Sophia, there is an insistence on mirroring between the angelic singing in heaven and its echo in the human chant of praise of the divine on earth. Thus, an acoustic mirror, esoptron. The celestial agentic force reflects in the human terrestrial performance. Voice and reverberation are paired as incident and reflected rays. This is how the inauguration anthem of 562 describes the acoustic mirroring of heaven and earth. I quote, "Here is the voice of joyfulness and of salvation, and an echo of those making festival in the spirit, which God composed as a harmony of many voices, life and a resurrection of all." End of quote. The celestial voice of joy reflects in the reverberant echo of human chant. and in the process, pneuma as spirit and breath envelop and it's consumed by the faithful. In the chant I will play, which is a prokimenon, a gradual, sung before the scriptural readings for the feast of Basil I, you will see how the divine model in the singing of Sophia is mirrored, echoed in the human performance. The chant is structured as a call and response. The celestial leads, the terrestrial reflects. The singing of the word Sophia wisdom establishes the model, and you can see it here with a long melisma followed by the intercalation of non-semantic vocables. The melody is then repeated with small variations at the singing of all the people, pantata ethni, but the human mirror of the divine wisdom, but it is slightly decreased in ambitus. It only reaches to F as opposed to G in the singing of Sophia. Observe also the dissolution of form in the singing of Sophia and Pantata Ethni, with the melismas and the intercalations of nge and nge. Melismas and intercalations become the acoustic equivalent of henosis, of the dissolution of the nous in Sophia. And I'm going to play it for you now.
Bissera, we can't hear it.
You can't hear
For
it?
some
Okay.
reason. No, we can't hear the sound that you're playing now.
Very well, I'll try again. I'll stop
Yes.
the sharing and redo it again just to make sure. Thank you for letting me know.
Yes, I think, oh, people can hear it. No, other people can hear it. I can see now in the chat. So play it again. Okay, play it
Very
again.
well, not a problem. I'll play it till here. The important parts that I want to draw is the reflectivity of Sophia and the way it's sung at Pantata Ethni. So there is a divine model and human reciprocation in it. And just a few words about what you just heard. The live auralization that you heard is the product of the collaboration Icons of Sound, and specifically Jonathan Abel, who developed the system in which the acoustic samples of balloon pops that are recorded in Hagia Sophia, he used those to extract the acoustic signature of the space, and then in collaboration with Cappella Romana to imprint that acoustic signature on live performance. So many more chants are recorded through this collaboration. This is our website, Icons of Sound. This is the album, The Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia by Cappella Romana, where you could hear them. They're available on Spotify, they're available on Naxos as well. One other aspect that you also heard within the chant is how the form of words disintegrates, like Sophia and Pampata ethni, through the melismas and the intercalations. So it becomes acoustic manifestation of henosis, of union. In the optical, the sun is the agentive power. In the horos of light in the interior, by contrast, in the aural domain, the human voice takes on the agentive power. The transformation from human breath into divine pneuma takes place in the dome. The apex of the dome is a chiasm, transforming sonic energy into the metaphysical bodiless voice, the acousmetre. The elite choir sings from the ambo, this structure down here. And here is an 11th century manuscript that shows when the elite choir could climb up the stairs to project their voices into the void. This elite choir is positioned under the eastern rim of the dome, and this is how Paul de Silentri describes its agentive presence in the space. In the center of the kallichoros are the pious hymn-singing cantors, the universal axis. The agency of their voice makes manifest how the divine utterance Amphi is mixing the immaculate spirit with mortal flesh, announcing the human incarnation of Christ. End of quote. By exhaling their breath in space, the singers activate the acoustics of the interior and the imagination of the faithful, making the divine a temporal icon of sound that reverberates and gradually dissipates below the threshold of audibility. The Greek distinguishes between the mystical divine utterance, designated with the Homeric word Amphi, from the voice of the mortals, phoni. Amphi is at the root of omphalos, the umbilical center, around which the world revolves. It is this invisible and at first inaudible metaphysical presence that enters the perceptible when human breath is exhaled in space. The revolving motion is also suggested by the word hymnopoli, which designates the singers, for polos is an axis around which the spherical celestial bodies revolve. Chant is imagined as an agentive force that brings about the choros. The material shell, the kallichoros, reacts to this energy, breathe it out, transforming the silence into vibrations of energy, propagating and reflecting off the walls and consumed by the bodies of the faithful. The divine thus becomes sensorially present, but withdrawn from anthropomorphic figuration. Hence, the invisible iconicity of the human incarnation of Christ is a temporal phenomenon, an icon of sound, breath, energy, incarnate in space. The Justinianic interior manifested the divinity in this icon of sound, free from figural representations. This performative image is metaxic. It partakes in pneuma, just as pneuma identifies both breath and spirit, so singing is an act of inspiriting, exhaling breath, allowing the interior and exterior to interconnect as a system of vibrations consumed by bodies. The icon of sound is an essentialist image. It partakes in the essence of the prototype. The icon of sound is a concept that crosses over the Islamic realm and establishes shared values. The acoustic mirroring of celestial and terrestrial is present in Rumi's poetry. As the divine sound, love, overshadows the terrestrial, it overcomes the earthly din, enabling the soul to recognize its likeness in the divine face within. I quote, "Love sounds the music of the spheres. Love echoes through earth's harshest din. The world of God's pure mirror clear, to eyes when free from clouds within. With love's own eyes the mirrors view, and there see God, to self akin." End of quote. In the introspective journey, the polished heart of the purified is a mirror, whose reflective surface reveals the recognition or dissolution of the self in the divine. The process of purification allows the faithful to recuperate in themselves the image of the divine. To conclude, in reading Byzantine mystagogical texts with Rumi and Ikhwan al-Safa into the fabric of Hagia Sophia, this paper puts in action Walter Benjamin's understanding of the task of the translator as that of finding, I quote, "in his own language, that latent structure which can awake the echo of the original. It calls the original inside. For genuine translation is translucid. It does not veil the original text, nor shadow it. Rather, it allows the radiant universal language, a radiance intensified by the particular idiom, to fall the more brightly on the original." End of quote. Translation is form, allowing the universal language, the divine, to resonate. I see Rumi's poetry as translation of sacred space, the way it is perfectly incarnate in Hagia Sophia. His poetry makes the material fabric of this great building translucid, allowing us to recognize spirit within. I also purposefully read Rumi to show that the alterity of the Islamic mystic. I also purposefully read Rumi to show that in the alterity of the Islamic mystic, we find the intimacy of Christian spirituality. The recognition of otherness at the center of identity allows us to accept otherness outside. The outstanding universal value of Hagia Sophia will be honored when this building resonates with its historical multiple religious voices without strife. Cultural heritage is not about who speaks the loudest to claim this monument, but who recuperates in the audible the traces of loss which have fallen below the threshold of human hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bissera. I would like to ask the audience now to write their questions in the Q&A so that we read them. I see there are people who have raised their hands, so maybe I will let them ask you their question directly. Bissera, shall we do this?
Very well.
Okay, Glenn Garrett, I guess, please go ahead and ask your question. No, I think you have to write your questions in the Q&A. I don't think we can, yes. So, Joanne Bennett, what book did she read from? What book did you read from? I guess this has to do with, yeah, go ahead.
The development of the analysis of Byzantine mystagogy is in my book, Hagia Sophia, Sound, Space, and Spirit in Byzantium. But this talk presents new material, and I read the Brethren Purity, which is published in translation by Owen Wright. And I also read the poetry of Jalaluddin Rumi, which has appeared in many different editions. I think it's easier to find.
Thank
so
you.
That's the short answer.
Thank you, thank you. We have more questions. So Alexandria Brown Hedjazi, she is asking, could you speak more about the altering of Islamic mysticism? I'm also curious if you found any other relations between the circularity of Hagia Sophia and circularity of Sufi practices.
My talk is an invitation. I invite other people to step on this path and really think about shared spiritual practices. So clearly the Mevlevi order has the practice of sama, sound, which is connected sound and dance. And it's a field for exploration. I'm just scratching the surface. I would say also at the center within Islamic practice is the tawaf, of the circulation of the Kaaba. So we're coming back to really core spiritual ideas that underscore many different religions. I'll leave it open. I feel that this is a question that I'm inviting the scholars of Islamic religion and art and architecture to step in. It's a dialogue that I'm trying to establish.
Wonderful.
The austerity of Byzantium, never too Western and never too Eastern, of being in between. So Byzantium is the door.
Thank you, Bissera. So there is another question, and I'm sure many people wonder whether if you know, Patrick Becker and Neidenhoff is asking, do you know how the carpets that have been installed influence the building's acoustic characteristics, especially given different speech intelligibility ideals between the Byzantine chant and the Quranic recitation?
The carpets have negative effect on both the optical and the acoustic manifestation of this metaphysical energy in the space. They reduce the light and they reduce the reverberation. So the building is less inspirited as a result, which means that microphones and electric lights now find themselves anchored in it. And it's just veils the aesthetic of that building.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we can ask now Glenn Garrett, who has been permitted to talk. Would you like to ask your question, Glenn Garrett? Hello?
We can't hear. I can't hear.
Yes, I can't hear either. Yes, okay. Why don't you, Glenn Garrett, please write your question in the Q&A, and this way we can ask Bissera. So there are people who are just writing congratulatory notes. And we will give you the Q&A later, Bissera. So what does the current Turkish political leadership gain by changing the status of Hagia Sophia from museum to mosque? Is it purely ideological or symbolic? How does Hagia Sophia as a mosque help those leaders politically or otherwise? Spencer Woolley is asking this question.
The reconversion of the museum into a mosque is entirely a political and ideological act. It's complex. It's like the type of translation that Benjamin did not support. The type of translation that cannot make the original echo inside. The building belongs to two religions. The triumphalist discourse is reductivist, and it is not just the conversion of the building, but the new website that the Turkish government placed online, which had erased Byzantium. So this building, it's not even, there are 3 sentences that relate to Justinian, and in these 3 sentences, Byzantium is represented as an empire of decay, earthquakes, and political instability. And then Mehmed Fatih comes in and establishes stability. In other words, this is one voice, and that is the Ottoman voice, silencing the Byzantine. And I find this to be against what the outstanding universal value of this building is as a UNESCO monument. It needs, truth is about the multiple voices, not the erasure of voices. This conversion was about erasure of voices.
Yes.
And it's also not surprising, this is the last thing I'm going to say, Hagia Sophia is just an iceberg. It's at the peak, this reconversion, it's at the peak of what is happening in Turkish society today. Frequently, 2 weeks ago, Turkey's pull out from the women's protection of women's rights is an example. It frequently appears with the image of Hagia Sophia. The news is introduced with the image of Hagia Sophia. It's silencing of voices that we are seeing and the rise of a totalitarian regime.
Thank you, thank you. So Maria Xanthou is asking, I would like to hear your view on illumination and light in Hagia Sophia and the hesychast's emphasis on divine light and possible connections with Islamic mysticism.
I don't have a precise answer to this huge question. I'm not a scholar focusing on hesychasm. It is a mystical movement within Byzantium, the late period, and it has all this introspective aspect to it, of really the discovering the divine in the silence, in the darkness, illumination. So it's a way, again, of channeling Neoplatonic ideas. But I'm not scholar in the field in order to give more insightful answer. I'll just step down and leave the platform for someone else.
Sure, thank you. Mark Hammond is asking, are there examples of solar alignment in the design of churches elsewhere, or might it be a result of the normal east-west alignments?
Hagia Sophia is pretty specific, and given who the architects were of Hagia Sophia, even though we don't have texts that speak about intentionality, the building is intentionally aligned with the solstices. There are many important churches within Christendom who are occidented, like St. Peter's, for example. So orientation is special, but it is an aspect in which architecture historians could pay attention to, and there are examples of churches that are aligned with the rise of the sun on the feast day of the saints to which the church is dedicated. So I'll say this is one more aspect that could be raised as one studies a material fabric of the ecclesiastical building from the past.
Mm-hmm. So Glenn Garrett now has written his question. He was trying to ask before, could you say something more about the effects of the gold tesserae and the role in the light play?
They create a vibrant, shimmering surface. Those mosaics that are close to the human being in the space, like the mosaics that are in the vaults of the side aisles, whenever the sun touches them, because of the way they form an irregular surface, they shimmer when light shines on it. And so it creates this perceptual experience of animation, of the inert that had become alive. Now, the dome had a very so much of the reflective capacity of the surfaces of Hagia Sophia had been reduced, because you could see that the upper structure, which is where the gold mosaic is, had lost huge patches of this gold mosaic, and nowadays it's covered in paint. And so the paint cannot communicate, cannot perform, in a sense, the same marmarigma effect of the gold. So we are looking at a reduced phenomenon. And to mention just briefly, the reconstructions in the 19th century by the Fossati brothers probably had brought a lot of damage to the mosaics, because they covered the surface with oil paint, and as a result they captured moisture. And when the earthquake happened at the end of the 19th century, this is the moment in which the majority of the mosaics that they saw were destroyed. And that's why when Whittemore starts working in the 30s, he could not discover again the Pentecost, for instance, in the upper galleries, and so on and so forth. So I would say paint that has taken over the mosaic had a detrimental effect. And I would say the building needs cleaning. The marble surfaces need cleaning, and there should be consideration of what ways could be used to preserve the gold mosaics, as well as to think of ways in which the surfaces that had lost the mosaics could be activated to perform in the aesthetics of that space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Juan de Lara is asking, do you know if the solar alignments you pointed out in Hagia Sophia were replicated in other Justinian sacred buildings, we sort of had a similar question. Was it a widespread phenomenon exploited by architects at the time?
I don't know. So I would say that most of my effort in the preparation of this talk was to complete the animations, and less so in terms of tracking down what other buildings have this alignment. But the winter solstice is significant ceremonially for Hagia Sophia because of the inauguration on the 23rd of December and Christmas. So in other words, there is both the birth of the building and the birth of Christ that coincides with that and kind of solidifies the interest in the aligning the building to the azimuth of the sun.
Thank you. Albertus Ju is asking, what do you think about the melodic and harmonic similarity between the Byzantine chants and especially post-15th century Islamic chants? Do you think this is a coincidence, or do you think there's a continuation of a certain tradition through the use of spaces like Hagia Sophia?
The way in which I could answer this question right now, because this is not a field I am researching in, 15th century Ottoman music, what I would say is that both Christian and Islamic cultures share the notion of icons of sound. And so the way sound triggers the imagination and the way the modes are used and the way they're perceived as a microcosm of the macrocosm are shared sensitivity. So this is a question that is in front of musicologists. And I myself will be curious to read more, but I cannot give any precision. But I would say there is a shared Neoplatonic basis to Sufism and Christianity that is invested in music.
Thank you. Alexei Gibson is asking, are you familiar with the work of Margaret Barker with regard to temple, Jerusalem theology? To what extent do you think the Byzantine builders of Hagia Sophia were consciously influenced by temple traditions?
I noted down the name. I have not read the work of Margaret Barker. It's within the popular narrative tradition about the building of Hagia Sophia. Justinian was obsessed with surpassing Solomon. So clearly there is a connection between the two, but I cannot give a precise answer. Thank you.
So Jennifer Lowell is asking if in better days the Hagia Sophia is reinstated as a welcoming museum, would you suggest maintaining this silence or perhaps having some sort of display, such as inviting groups to sing chants, to make visitors aware of the auditory features of the space and not just its visual appearance? Thank you for your insights, she says also.
That is my dream. I am supportive of the idea that this is unprecedented. It's outstanding sacred space, and the best way in which a museum could work is actually to allow that space to be used spiritually. And in that case, I would say that both chant and the recitation are important venues through which the metaphysical appears in that space, and meaningful venues for both Christians and Muslims. So I would see that space as the instrument of the human voice for chant and for recitation that makes one aware of breath and the divine through that. Where it's pneuma or ruh, it's this notion of really of the interpenetration.
Thank you. Philip Geisier is asking, I wonder about the transcultural life of the Hagia Sophia and how and in what ways later Ottoman architecture, such as the Selimiye and the Süleymaniye, might have specifically taken up spatial and sensorial strategies of light and its spiritual meaning.
This is an excellent question because it has been in my mind as I was preparing the talk, and then it is already a long talk and I decided to cut that part out. I was reading Jafar Effendi, who is a 17th century writer who wrote a biography of Mehmet Aga, who was the architect who built the Sultan Ahmed Mosque. And I was interested, really, the reason I'm focusing on the Sultan Ahmed Mosque is because, like Hagia Sophia is oriented towards the Bosphorus, and it is the reduction of the Hagia Sophia space to the central core of the building, to the kallichoros, and it is on a square foundation. So it is the dome and the semi-domes, in a sense, like I forget the word for it, the Irish sign, the green flower, the green, the petals are on the axial.
Trefoil.
Clover was the thing. I wanted to say clover. So why am I saying that? Is because as I was reading because Chefar Effendi offers an ekphrasis of a mosque space. It's quite fascinating text. And what made me realize the difference between the Hagia Sophia aesthetic and the one that Sinan introduces in the Suleimani and the Selimi, and eventually his follower, Mehmet Aga, into Sultan Ahmed, is that there is an interpenetration of light in the mosque at a very low level, at the level of the floor, which doesn't happen in Hagia Sophia. Light in Hagia Sophia comes from above down. And so this mystical envelope that Hagia Sophia presents, it's not followed in Ottoman architecture. It becomes, Ottoman architecture is modern, it's rational, and it insists on the notion of the sacred space as a garden, which is a very old motif. We see it already with the first mosques, the mosque at Damascus, for instance. And that allowed me to recognize the difference between the aesthetic of the sea in Hagia Sophia and the aesthetic of the garden in the Ottoman mosque. So I see differences in the structuring of metaphors through the architectural elements. But it is fascinating also. Chefar Effendi is imbued with Sufi spirituality when one reads his text. And last but not least, as a Bulgarian, I was struck again, I had forgotten, but Sinan is a Janissary. Mehmet Aga is a Janissary as well, one coming from Serbia, the other one either Albania or Bulgaria. And it is rather difficult to contemplate this notion of the greatest architects of the Ottoman Empire at the core of alterity, that these are Christian children converted to Islam that then produce these masterpieces of world art. And to me, that is the Ottoman Empire. It is this paradox of otherness at the center of identity. So the question is, should we continue the silencing of voices? So I'll stop here.
Mm-hmm. Gerard Botto is asking, is there any possibility to understand the marble pavement of Marmara also as an expression of Revelation 4:6, and before the throne, as it were a sea of glass like unto crystal? So this is a quote from Revelation 4:6.
So this is a very interesting question, and I think I'll answer in terms of reflectivity and mirroring, that this notion of the throne on the sea of glass is, again, a shared concept in Christianity and Islam. The cosmology that the Quran presents is, again, that the divine throne is on the surface of water. So it basically shows how Hagia Sophia is a microcosm of the macrocosm, and it's invested in the cosmology, in the mythology of cosmology, and it's shared between the two religions. I make it a short answer this time around.
So now there is a longer text here, and I'll just ask you the question. So Jeremy Walton wonders what you make of the aestheticization of Hagia Sophia on the part of the neo-Ottoman triumphalists, such as Erbash, who is basically the director of the religious affairs in Turkey. Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about this issue, and I've arrived at different answers. One of the most recent ones that I have been thinking is really through Walter Benjamin. What happened in 2020 was a bad translation, basically translating the Ottoman conquest in the 21st century without the core. And the core was really a thriving empire. That's not what Erdogan's gesture is about. Erdogan's gesture is actually about it's hiding economic and political instability. So it is a translation without making the original resonant. If the Mehmed Fatih was about conquest and an incredible energy that revitalized Constantinople, this is not the case. So I think it's an empty gesture, and it's unfortunate because together with it, it's also a gesture, it's suppression.
Another question, I do not read also the congratulatory parts of the messages because we would take a very long time. So how do you see the Byzantine values translate to the digital era of the 21st century? What can we learn from it that meaningfully corresponds to this new world we're living in?
I will say two things. That digital technology had enabled us to travel through space, in a sense, and create these worlds of imagination. And the type of work that Icons of Sound had produced with Alexander Lingus and Jonathan Abo of making us hear the sound of Hagia Sophia again is fantastic. I was the one who collected the acoustic samples, but the knowledge of software and technology of Jonathan Abo and the singing and the knowledge of music of Alexander Lingus had really allowed us this acoustic space to hear Hagia Sophia. So clearly that has been amazing feat. But I'm also an art historian, and I believe there is the actual building, and being in the actual building and feeling the light in that space is special, and it cannot be substituted by computer. So I'm in between. I'm the chiasm, in a sense, saying that yes, technology could allow us to space travel, but the building is there and it has to be experienced.
There's one more question. Where has the choir been situated at? Around the synthron, around Ambo? What is the meaning of solea in this context? The place the light shines onto at a certain time of the day, year, or symbolic illumination in transition of spaces heading to altar. So there are several questions here. Yeah. Patrick.
So there are many singers in that space. Most of my talk really focuses on the main actors. These are the psalti. They're the elite singers, and their number is 25. They have one leader, and they perform on bi-weekly turns, 12 at a time. They're the ones who go up on the ambo, and the ambo is situated underneath the eastern rim of the dome. So as their voice projects, because they sing above the head level of the faithful, they project their voice to the dome and activate the acoustics of the dome. Behind them, in the solea, are the anagnostis, and they are, in the period of the 7th century, they are 160. They perform, half of them, on bi-weekly sessions, and so one could expect 80 singers from this support choir, which is not the main leading choir. They fill in, and then there are other choirs of orphans and of nuns that were interspersed in the space. It sounds like the women choir was in the north aisle, and this is from Paul the Silenciary's ekphrasis, but it's not stable evidence that we have. It's not precise evidence that we have. And last but not least, everyone sings in that space. That there are the elite pieces where the psalti will sing, but there is the bone of of this liturgy, which is the singing of the psalmody. And the psalmody, the refrains are sung by all, which means that a space that could hold 16,000 people, it is a tremendous sonic energy that is exhaled in it. So it's complex in terms of who sings. Everyone should be singing. The service is about, there is no audience. Everyone is a performer. Everyone is implicated, the way everyone consumes that energy. And I'm fascinated by this idea because I find that listening to music and moving with music and singing is a type of a bodily investment that leads to transcendence, which being an audience sitting on a chair doesn't do the same thing, doesn't bring the same engagement.
Another question by Mary Jane Danan. Have all the mosaics been covered in the recent conversion?
I have not been in Hagia Sophia I don't know what the conversion had done to it. I have seen photographs that have been published, and there they are on the covering with veils is on the eastern apse, as well as above the royal doors and in the southwest vestibule. As far as I know, the imperial mosaics of Zui and Constantine of the Comnenians are viewable. They are not covered, and access to the galleries is considered as part of the museum access and not part of the mosque. But as I said, I am a third party communicating this information. I have not been there. I don't know.
John Kapetanakis is asking about the marble floors shown in the pictures. And linked to the water and Marmara Sea, are these from the Ottoman period? If yes, are there floor remnants from the Byzantine era? And how do you think these would affect light reflection during that era?
Most of the floor and the wall, and especially the wall revetments, are Byzantine, the 6th century. They are the Proconnesian marble used in the interior. Of course, the floor of the kallichoros has pieces of later additions, but they're very clear. You could see where new material is added. So I would say that the majority of the floor is Justinianic.
There is now there is another question. You spoke about the interior space of the Hagia Sophia. How do you think about the building's meaning both for the larger urban space of which it was a part, and maybe even at night, where it might have radiated interior light into the city? Philip Geisier is asking.
It's a great question and difficult answer, because in both in Christianity and Islam, there is I'll start with Christianity. Hagia Sophia is part of 3 churches that are interconnected, the Kokoperatia, the Hagia Irene, and Hagia Sophia. They're served by the same staff. And the cathedral liturgy has moments in which there are processions in the streets of Constantinople and moments where the liturgy is celebrated inside. So, for instance, the opening of the liturgical year on September 1st, there is a procession to the Forum of Constantine, and there is a singing from the Column of Constantine in the open air, under the sky, at night, under the stars. And then there are moments of celebration within the space of Hagia Sophia. So I would say that there is a constant interchange between interior, exterior, and we are less attuned to recognizing this. So the church is like a pole. It's a polos, an axis around which human action revolves. And the church also connects the city and creates a community. And the same thing could be said about the Friday Mosque. And so within a Friday Mosque, I think there's also another important aspect, the celebration of night, the Laylat al-Qadr, for instance. And so I would say that in general, and I'm art historian, and I'm recognizing that we have been much more comfortable studying monuments in sunlight than studying monuments in moonlight and in artificial light. And there's something that we need to be more attentive from now on to that aspect of night. There are descriptions of Hagia Sophia at night in the same text by Paul de Silentri, which are very evocative. They speak about the polycandela with oil lamps as ships at the night sky. And they also speak about the church, it's a metaphor, as a pharos, as a tower of light, I'm missing right now the English word, around which the ships see where the shores are and are able to navigate. It's a metaphor, but in general it speaks about that space generates its own light in the day and at night.
A lighthouse, huh?
Lighthouse.
A lighthouse, yeah. Mm-hmm. So a question, now we have a question here about the website that you used in order to hear these chants and songs within the church. What was the website? Jake Waddell is asking, yeah.
So the easiest way to find it is if you type in icons of sound and maybe Stanford. So icons of sound in Stanford would lead you to our website. My book on Hagia Sophia has a website as well, and then the album, The Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia, are available on Naxos as well as Spotify.
Mm-hmm. And I will ask now one final question, I think, Bissera, because I think we're running out of time. Could you tell us some words about the performative aspect of the light in relation with image and the movement of the clergy during the liturgy?
It's a complex question again, because I'm through my mind passing like, am I going to speak about the Cherubicon, the imperial liturgy with the ecclesiastical elite in that space? Is it about the coronation? Is it about the celebration of Christmas? Is it about the raising of the cross? So in other words, each feast is specific. What I'll answer with the information most readily available through Thomas Whittemore, and therefore bring the attention back to Dumbarton Oaks. His observation that in the summer months there is a moment in the third hour, in the third liturgical hour, in which direct sun rays disappear from the interior. This moment coincides with the Eucharist. So in other words, that the space is not dark, it's just that it's illuminated by reflected and diffused light, but you don't have shafts of light in that space. It's pretty potent. So in other words, there are moments of perfect alignment that happen in this interior. And it is what I'm becoming more and more aware in both Greek and Latin sources is so much of the medieval ceremony focuses on detail, that the essence of the idea is already in the detail, and it's like a fractal. So if you manage to crack, in a sense, and arrive at that understanding, you recognize the complexity with which this ritual is built. So this is one example among many. The second one, the alignment and the rise of the sun in the winter solstice, how potent to celebrate orthros in that space. The birth of light, the birth of Christ, the birth of the church. So it means that every element within that space could be looked in with close concatenation of what the ritual practices are.
Well, thank you, Bissera. Thank you for a splendid talk, truly, and for the amazing answers you gave to so many questions about all of these aspects. Congratulations again, thank you. And I would like also to thank our staff at Dumbarton Oaks, Judy Lee and Charlotte Gutierrez and IT for making this happen as well. And thank you all for attending the event. We have had an audience from many places around the globe, and we are looking forward to seeing you again to one of our public lectures. Thank you, Bissera. Congratulations. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Good night, Anna. To
Good
you.
night.
Sleep well.
Bye.